All right, and welcome. We are live here again. And if you're joining me for the first time, my name is Will Playden, and I am an illustrator and moving gradually through our Masters of the Universe, 52 of them. And today we're going to be painting HeMan, which is our part 2. So last time we drew him as a character. Today we are going to actually be painting him and overlaying those colors. So welcome if you're here to join me, and by all means draw along with me as we go, and jump onto the chats, say good day, and definitely draw along with us and give me updates as you go. So here we go. So enjoy the process, hopefully. Just let me know too if there's any reverb or mic issues. Last time we had a little bit, but just let me know as we go, and off we go, running. All right, let me just get that lined up. All right. So I've got my paints here ready today, and we're just going to go through and start putting in some of our base colors for our HeMan character, and so obviously a lot of flesh tones, a lot of warm colors. And so I've got my raw siennas, and I've got my cadmium reds. I've got my burnt orange ready to go as well, my cadmium orange. So I'm kind of just going to be working through some of my warm tones, but I got a nice Prussian blue there too, which is going to help to cool it down to some of our shadows. Excuse me. And then obviously we're going to be working over and getting some of those steel effects for his armor, some of the bear skin effects for his sort of bear skin sort of underwear there, barbarian underwear, and his boots. And so then finally obviously going through and getting some of his bright sort of orange gauntlets and his belt, which is synonymous with all of our Masters of the Universe characters. So I'm just using standard brush. I'm using a bit of a mixture of Art Spectrum and Reeves sort of gouache at the moment, which you can buy at any store or online. And of course with gouache, it's a nice sort of activating medium where I can sort of jump in and out of areas and not worry too much, especially in the heat that we experience in Australia. Things dry out quickly, but gouache is good because I can reactivate it as we go. So, alrighty, so here we go. Let's start by putting this as underlays. Again, if you have any questions, jump on and ask them of me. I will periodically look up and answer as I go, of course, but I'll welcome any of those questions. I'm happy to share any of this stuff as we go. and hopefully we'll get something pleasing happening out of here. So the good thing about the pencil drawing is what I've established the last time we were doing this was that I now know where all my landmarks are going to be. So it kind of given that to me already. Now I'm just reaffirming some of those light source choices that I made last time. And with me and my process is that when often I get to the color stage, that's when I really discover perhaps some of the anatomical choices I made are a little bit off or correct or need to be built on or reduced. So this allows me to do some good changes now as we're moving through it. So I'm going to start, I think, up in the area here, so I'm not sort of overworking, leaning over and working on my image too much. So just going to start by putting in some of those mid-tones around the face. And this area here we call the terminator line. This is obviously where the light terminates from being a light source on the face and starts becoming shadow. And we know on this side here, obviously I'm going to be doing a bit of reflected light in there too. So this area becomes fairly important because it will be probably one of the darkest areas of the face, as I really want it to sort of crest between a light area and a reflected light area. So it's got to look like that light really hits a joint there as it moves around. So I'm just getting a little bit of black to that, maybe a little bit of Prussian blue. Add that to my raw sienna as I'm working. So if you're with us for the first session, we were doing Beastman. And I'll bring that up on screen now so you can see the finished result. So that's our Beastman. So we're going to move gradually through the 52 Masters of the Universe. This could be a life project at the rate we're going. We've had to make a few pauses as a group, including myself, obviously, mainly because there's things you have to do. Like there's commissions that need to be done, and there's some people are working on published works at the moment. So those things take a priority, of course. But as we move through this little challenge, it gives us a focus. And one of my ones is to really try and push for full anatomy pieces, because I do spend a lot of time doing portraits. So it's nice to sort of challenge myself to work through the anatomy and trying really hard to not reference, there's so many muscles to concern yourself with, and with these characters there's not really a lot of room or clothing to hide behind. So it allows me to sort of get into the practice of remembering where those muscles hide, where they tuck, where they fold, where you have gravity and weight, where the hips move, all of those things that you tend to have to figure out on the run when you're doing this kind of stuff. It's just a nice way of getting into practice, and I just love the property. Like, this is something I grew up with, and it's just super fun. As you can see now, I'm starting to lay in some of those light areas on the face. And I just added a little bit of white and a slight amount of water to my gouache, and it allows me to move and spread it out a little bit. Now you might notice I'm not really leaving lots of highlight areas on this face, and the reason for that is number one is I want to make sure that when I do add a shiny highlight to it, that it has impact. It doesn't really need a lot on the face, and it's not like they've sort of dipped themselves in baby oil like they do in the world of bodybuilding. These characters are going to be sort of leaning on trying to make them as out in the world realistic as much as I can. And so to do that, I want to make sure that when I do put my little highlights on the face, that they really have those impacts of jumping out. I don't want it to look overly plastic, I don't want it to look like an action figure too much, even though I'm kind of leaning on the original resource of those action figures, the things that remind me of the character the most. And it's a bit of a mix of those mini comics and the action figures and a little bit of the cartoon, because we all grew up watching that HeMan cartoon. But for me, I love the HeMan cartoon, but I kind of love the early 80s mini comics as well, because that was really where, the HeMan character, for me, being a Frazetta and a Conan guy, for me, that's where the character kind of rested for me. I love that idea of him coming out from the savage wilds and, leaving the tribe to adventure out and discovering that, that he had this power armor by saving someone, and Man-at-Arms lived in this little hut out there in the middle of nowhere. These characters had almost a different lore than what they ended up with on the TV show. And I know there's a fair amount of people that love that kind of stuff, but for me, that's where HeMan kind of resonates for me, is that it's a real sort of sword and sorcery fantasy realm. Bit of a mix of technology and sort of ancient ways, which is really cool. All right, so I don't want too much of that red on there. I'm just going to try and move into the hair. Because he's got blonde hair, I don't want to move in too much into that area. If he had dark hair, I could probably move up a little bit and be safe, but because he's got blonde, it doesn't overlay as much as I'd like to right over the top. So I want to make sure that I get those skin tones. Just moving into the forehead area a little bit. Then we got a bit of foreshortening happening on the head here, so you don't see a lot of the top of his head, but we are going to see a little bit of his brow there. And I've lightened up a little bit of the pencil work. I'll probably have to do a little bit more lightening up as I move down with a needle or a razor, so that my gouache doesn't get too muddy, or it doesn't start to peek through the gouache too much, because then you sort of reduce your choices later if you allow that to happen. But yes, we're looking pretty monochromatic at this stage, but what my process is I tend to let this dry, then I come through and I put in some of the burnt sienna colors and reaffirm some of those heavy shadows. Some people work over it with a bit of pencil. You can do that too. I've done that. That's nice. You just can't get too carried away because it ends up becoming quite obvious. But I want it to still retain that kind of watercolory look, like those early Alcala mini comics look like, where they were painted. Right, again, so we've got a bit of a Terminator line on his chin area here. So I'm just going to redefine a little bit of that. And then we're going to do some reflected light underneath his chin as well. So I'm just moving into that area that I've just worked, tucking around that corner there. So again, if you've just joined me today, what we're doing here in this live stream is not only obviously gouache painting the HeMan characters as we move through them, but it's just a point of where we can get together and as a little bit of a community. You can ask questions. We can have a bit of banter like last time. Definitely get in there and do some art with me. That's a super fun part. And or just enjoy sitting back and listening to the painting. So as we evolve it as we go. All right, so I'll just put in a bit of that. I'm going to put a bit of blue in, I think, underneath there, just to cool that chin area down. So Prussian blue is what I'm using. And if you're joining me for the first time, my name is Will Playden. I've done everything from portraits to comics to wildlife, cars, you name it, over the years. And if you want to follow what I do, definitely please like and subscribe on the YouTubes. That always helps. And I post fairly regularly on Facebook and Instagram. So please jump on those areas and follow along. And, you know, any great gift to an artist is to share their work. So please help to share around as we go. All right. So I'm going to add a little bit in those eyes now. What I do is I tend to put in a little bit of that skin tone just in the whites of the eyes. And then I come back later and I re-whiten some of those areas where I need to. But again, I'm using no reference here, so I'm kind of just moving my way through making decisions around the form and where the light falls as we go. And there's no, you know, massive decision as to why I didn't use a reference. It's just that I'm trying to just challenge myself a little bit. There's nothing wrong with using references. I think that's where your greatest learning comes from. I'm just trying to do it because I just want to get to that point where I have a sort of a memory bank of how these muscles work, so I can kind of draw it on quickly rather than referencing. It just helps me a little bit. All right, now we've got that face in. I'm going to just get a little bit of that orange and a little bit of that burnt sienna and define some of those edges again. I'm just going to move into that terminator line. It's always a sort of safe space to work in because it's dark. And if you're using reasonably thin paper, like I'm using Bristol, 11x17 Bristol, but I don't want to go too hard too fast, and I don't want to have too much in there too quickly because it tends to cornflake up. So I'm just going to just go gently with not too much water or paint loaded on the brush as I move through this area here. And I tend to, you know, probably some people find it a little bit frustrating, but I tend to compartmentalize the drawing as I go. So I go from sort of section to section slowly. Some people work throughout it, like my friend Kenny Calderone. If you don't know him, follow along with him. He's fantastic. But Kenny will work throughout in a fluid movement, sort of jumping from thing to thing, which is great. I really admire that. It's a very painterly way of doing it. And of course, you can follow him he's on the YouTube as Wildings Ken and on Instagram and Facebook. Love Kenny's work. So I'm pretty happy that's sort of building up now. Drop that shadow down under his neck. And you want to make sure that you have form in your shadows. I see a lot of artists sometimes just drop it straight into black, which, you know, sometimes has its benefits. But I remember when I started drawing a painting, someone always said to me, look, always make sure that you've got something happening in your shadows, because it gives a bit of depth and also makes it believable. And allows you then to really darken some of those deep areas like armpits and under the armors and areas like that, and it doesn't sort of get lost in those heavy shadows either. Hope that wherever you are in the world, that you are all well and looking after yourselves as we head to the Christmas season pretty rapidly. You know, find time to be with the loved ones and find time to create. I mean, that's the best thing we can do when things get a bit hectic and crazy, is to sit down and find time to do something that's not heavy into 3D. Allows you to breathe and focus and lose yourself in a bit of creativity, whether it be music or art, filmmaking, editing, animation, anything that writing, anything that allows you to move beyond. So I'm just, as I'm going, I'm kind of just redefining, layering. Gouache is good that way. You can sort of build your layers up as you move through. For me, I quite enjoy the medium. All right, so what I'll do is I'll come back to that area, that head in the area in a minute, and because warmth in my studio at the moment will probably dry that pretty rapidly, and then I'll come back and redefine some of those areas. And I'm just going to continue to move down now, so I'll move into his torso area. Yeah, one of the annoying things about gouache is that you're constantly mixing colors, but it does give you a good handle on your palette mixing too. So there is a benefit to that. So we're going to, again, work in our Terminator line to start with. Keep wetting the brush too, and drying it. Allows you to unload a little bit of old paint in there. You don't want it clogging up. Also keeps the bristles fairly moist so they can drift across your page with ease rather than dragging. And unless you're deliberately using a dry brush technique, it allows you to move across your page with a bit of ease. Because really, that should be the least of your worries. You really, you know, if you're like me, like when I'm painting, my brain's at war. Like I'm working things out. I'm doing 1,000 things at the same time, sort of asking questions, answering questions, asking questions, and as part of that process of channeling the image, you know, where do I put in a little bit of highlight? Have I gone too far? Have I gone too dark? Moving back, you know, it's all part of that process. If you're interested in any of the work that we create on this channel, I create on this channel, or any of my guests create on the channel, I'll always post their links at the end. Being I'm going solo today, if you are interested in any of these works, you can follow my links on my pages to the Etsy shop that I have, where Beastman's currently available, and other artworks as well. Or you can just jump on all the socials. It's just the Art of Will Played on all of those respective platforms, and you can follow along, interact with me as we go through the week or with each other. Show me your art. I'd love to see it. It's always fun seeing other people create. I think it's one of the great things that have come out of this whole social media thing is just seeing the insight into other people's worlds of creation. We didn't always get that before. So I just add a little bit of orange to my colouring. It might be too heavy, but we'll see how we go. I do want to give him a fairly bronze sort of finish. It's going to be around that thumb there. Yeah, the interesting process with this HeMan, I drew him 4 times, and I think that's just like when I draw Superman. There's a lot of pressure of, oh God, this character is so iconic. Beastman was like bang, done. But HeMan, it just took me a bit to process through having the pose I wanted. The one I really wanted was the sword in the air, and when he's activating his transformation. But I just couldn't keep the same proportions as Beastman and the ones I want to do, and have it all fit in the page. I mean, in reality, I probably would have chosen a larger illustration board if I wasn't going to try and get this to a print at some stage or into a book. I probably would have gone with a larger Bristol or something so I could squeeze all the image in. But I think just due to time, it was time and the end product. I wanted to make sure that it sort of fit in the page, and I didn't want to shrink him down because I wanted to make sure that if you were going to get to a print or a trading card size, it was something you could flip through, and the characters all looked reasonably the same proportions in terms of the size of their face compared to their hands. And I didn't want a super close up and then a far away one. I wanted it consistent as a series. All right, so as you can see, I'm going a little bit lighter here. I have added a little bit of white to my colors. And what I do then is once I've got the white down, I just unload the brush, have a little bit of water on it, and I use what's on there to move out. And of course, this is not the finished thing, but it just allows me to see where my light areas are going to be. And then I can come through and later I'll put a little bit of highlight there, a little bit of sheen happening on the muscles. Not too much, like I said, we don't want to make it look too plasticky, but just a little bit to make sure it pops. You can see that Terminator line starting to fold that muscle over a little bit now as we move. And because I've done that area with that same sort of orangey register, I'm going to sort of move in and redefine some of his neck muscles, chin, jawline, give him a little bit more bronze on the face now. You got to be careful too. Like, you can overbuild an area with gouache, and it tends to look very milky and messy. Made that mistake early on very many times. I remember doing a Princess Leia piece, and I was doing her through the ages. So I was doing her, as the original New Hope Princess Leia, and then moving, through the Empire Strikes Back, Return of the Jedi, and so on. But I got to Return of the Jedi and realized that I'd stuffed the last portrait up a little bit, but in too much quickly. I got too confident and overconfident, and made it really milky, wrecked the whole thing. So I had to restart. So going slowly and methodically as you move through, and trying to keep in your mind a little toolbox of the things have worked well. Like, I remember how to do that first. Like, there's someone like Alex Ross, he puts in his greys and blacks first. There's a number of artists that tend to put in washes and layers first. I do what's worked for me. I've tried all those methods, and this is the best way I find works for me, because I spend a lot of time pre-thinking about the work before I start painting. So by the time I hit the ground running, so I sort of know where my darks are going to be, reflected light's going to be, how bright I want to go. It's kind of all there in my brain, in my crazy brain. All right, it's going to get a little bit of that blendy action happening in there. We're finding that reflected light under here. The chin, give it a little bit more tone. Steve Rude's another incredible artist I've been looking at a lot lately. I've been revisiting his work and I just love seeing his sketchbooks and his dedication to constantly improving. Like, I love that. It inspires me. And of course, it doesn't hurt that he tends to deal with a lot of the characters that I love to death too. Some of those same sort of beats in the cultural beats that I love, like the Hanna-Barbera characters and the superheroes. I love seeing all of that. And he tends to rotate around the era, which I love too. I just love that 40s and 50s, 60s sensibility. Some of that traditional illustration, it just really rings true to me as something that I love and resonate with. Some people just all they love is the 90s stuff, and that's cool too. All right, it's going to get in there and put in some of those lighter flesh tones. If you saw my palette, you'd probably see that some of it's starting to be pre-mixed now as I'm moving through and getting these colors together. It's starting to stay there. I just reactivated it with a little bit of paint, a little bit of water. All right, let's clean up a little bit of these areas a bit. So I think next on our list is Merman. That's going to be a fun one. I'm thinking perhaps having him emerging out of the water, sort of water dripping off him. I think I've got to squeeze in some sort of water creature, monster around him. Maybe some nice sort of reddy orange tentacles wrapping around his legs. It's a nice opposite to his green color. I'm always thinking of color and how it can move against itself. To make the image pop a little bit. Now, just like this one, I've got to decide what we're going to do as a minimal little background at the bottom. I want to put in a little bit of a hint of the world around them. With the Beastman, I had a little bit of the trees and the vine. I'm thinking with the HeMan, I might have a little bit of landscape at the bottom, some steam maybe a little bit of magma. So it's like he's just sort of transformed with a power sword. Yeah, see, I've just made that decision that his strap was too long, so I've just brought that in a bit. So welcome if you're just joining me. I have to keep doing this because people chime in at different times. We're now 36 minutes into the drawing. Welcome if you're joining me for the first time. Feel free to chime in and say hello on the comments or the chats. Make sure you let me know or let us know if you are painting along or drawing along, because we'd love to see your images. And of course, post them when you're finished on the Artists of the Universe Facebook site, which is where we are all doing our final drawings. And I know the artists that are involved, like Jim Riley, Kenny Calderon, They Stones, they're all sort of posting their artworks on there, and I would encourage you. My 10-year-old son, 11-year-old son did the same thing. Make sure you just for the fun of it, just jump on there and throw your artwork up and see what it looks like. There's no pressure. People just love seeing a bit of creative process. Of course, once you finish, put your price and where to find that artwork so people can buy it if they want. Right at Christmas time. Some good gifts. So I'm just building up those colours. Getting a bit of that, might add a little bit more of that orange and burnt sienna into that corner there. This increases the temperature a little bit. It sort of works against that blue in the shadows, which is good. I might just do the same at the top, just around that chin area a little bit more. I'm using a fairly, it's not a small brush, it's a fairly wide one. It just allows me to sort of move quickly in those areas, and then I can come back with a small one and render in some of those tight sort of areas. That way I'm not sort of caught too much on the detail. I can sort of put areas down, but not sort of slab it so quickly that I'm losing control of the amount of paint on the surface. Allows me to, and at the moment the brush is reasonably dry, so I'm allowing the sort of the moisture that's already on there to react with the paint on my brush. I can dry brush a little bit in there, and it allows it because the page is still reasonably moist. You just got to watch it, how much you can blend and how much you can move out. I've probably reached my limit with this area now. And yes, I've left the nipple free at the moment. I'll do the nipple later with the finer brush. I've just got a little bit of black on my brow now. I'm just working through sort of defining that area. I haven't used a lot of black so far, and the reason I don't is it tends to, it mutes my color down a bit, and I want to make sure that when I go to use it, I'm using it sparingly. I don't want to overly depend on that black. I want it to be subtle. I want it to pop when I do use it. I want it to count. It's just like the white. I want it to really matter. All right. Move down here now. Again, I'm starting in my safe areas, my midtones. Let's work on that rib cage sort of area. All right, if you are joining me for the first time, my name is Will Playden, and I am an illustrator and a published illustrator, and I've been doing this for a little while now. Also teach, and I'm based in Australia. So we are moving into the summer months just about, as you guys maybe perhaps overseas are moving into the opposite. And so I do these genres because I just find fun in them. It's reminiscent of, when we were younger, but they're just such rich properties that I just can't help myself. I just have to get in there and have a play, as they say in the toy box, whether it's HeMan or Star Wars or some of those Saturday morning cartoons. They're all super fun to play. And if you're joining me today, please jump in and say hello in the comments. I know you're here because we never know really. As we're running these stream rounds, we can't see who's actually in the room with us. But if you can jump in and say hello, then I know you're with me. I might just darken that area down a bit, I think, because one can have too many of those little ridges. I think it just becomes a bit distracting. My feeling is that would probably drop into shadow under that arm and shield anyway. Try and get that same sort of glowing effect happening under the pectoral muscle there a bit. Under here. I'll just unload the brush a bit. Just use a clean brush to move that light area around a bit. All right, I'm happy with that. So yep, I use tracing paper. This came up last live stream. I use the tracing paper because I don't want my hand smears moving across my artwork, but also I use the tracing paper because I can then see what's next, what I'm missing. I'm not sort of discovering as I go. I can kind of consider ahead of the game where I'm headed, especially when you get to the paint process. And that's why I start up here. It's similar, I suppose, to tattooing. You want to start further away from you so you're not moving over the work you've done. And allows me to move down a little bit as I go. Will I jump back at the top? Absolutely. And that'll happen probably after it's had time to settle and dry properly in the paper. So I'm not reactivating the moisture in the paper too much. And then I'll come through and I will probably redefine the darks, maybe have a splash in some of the highlights, maybe put in a little bit of that orange and perhaps some of that burnt sienna in there as well, to just warm up some of those flesh tones. And on my palette at the moment, I'll just show you actually. So this is the palette I got mixed up, and you can see I've got my orange, my raw sienna, my black, my whites, my Prussian blue, and my burnt sienna. And I'm kind of just moving through those areas, not corrupting my main paint blobs too much. I'm just kind of moving it into the centers, and my brain sort of knows automatically where to go as I'm grabbing from that palette. I don't have anything fancy in terms of palettes. I just buy cheap sort of melamite plates from down at the shop and reuse those over and over and over and over again until they become brittle and I can't use them anymore. But I tend to find that, or even ceramic plates I tend to find work really well. I try not to use container lids or anything because they just don't last, and I just don't like the how it's kind of just constant plastic waste everywhere. So I think the melamite is a nice balance for me. And it fits easily on the drawing board. I've just got it next to me and it doesn't take up too much landscape. All right, so just moving under this rib cage, and then obviously you make a decision as to how jutted out this area is going to be. You know, like sometimes you might have the character really with a back bent, and which means that this rib cage would cast a fair amount of shadow. Sometimes if the stomach's forward, it allows an exposure of those the abdomen as it brings that forward too. So that's always something to consider when you are putting in your highlights in your shadow areas. I'm just moving into the first abdomen area here, just seeing what that looks like for me, because I don't want to commit too quickly to darkening that area down when I feel like, oh, I kind of really want to expose the abs area a little bit more. Or perhaps it maybe makes the figure feels like he's falsely sticking that rib cage out, like we all do when we get older. All right, here we go. This will give us a nice little indicator as to if we want to darken. I think we will. I think we'll darken out a little bit of a shadow, not too dramatically, because I do have him pivoting a little bit on his hips here to his right, our left, where his weight is on the sword arm and that left leg, his right leg. I'm just saying left because that's the way I'm looking at him. But his weight is heavy on that side. So, and that's why I've got his arm lifted as well. So if you ever get stuck with those things, it's always great. A life drawing teacher told me once, always stand up and try and stand in the pose. And that will help you to figure out where your weight-bearing leg is, where your ribs get closer to the hips and your pelvic bone area. Nothing beats actually feeling the pose before you paint the pose. All right, so I'm just using a bit of water on the brush now to just soften up these edges. Do a bit of blending action. Like I said, a lot of this is not predetermined. A lot of this is decision making on the fly. As you're going, you sort of jump and grow feathers on the way down. You're moving through and going, right, I just want to, how do I darken that up? How do I lighten that? Is that working? Is that not working? So, and look, sometimes it doesn't. Sometimes it's a complete fail and you start again. Like I said, I drew 4 HeMan, and this was the original one I drew. So I kind of went back to where I had started, but I needed to go through that exploration to realize that this is where I wanted to land. I wanted a fairly heroic and stoic pose for him, but not too stiff and not too frozen. I didn't want to look like the back of an action figure card. I wanted it to look like there was something going on around him that had grabbed his attention and that he was in mid sort of process of reacting to that. I didn't want to look like he was glistening in the sun, clenched, staring off into the distance. I've done enough of those, but I really wanted to give these ones a little bit more movement and anatomy. All right, so it's going to move down his chest here, moving into his abdomen area, getting those tricky little areas between the abs and where the iliac crest or the top of the hip is, pelvic bone area. Making sure we honor those areas that are not always the most paid attention to areas of the muscular body. So I see a lot of comic artists, they skip these areas, and I just want to get good abs and good pecs and good biceps. But there's so many muscles that create the form that can lead to having a more convincing drawing, because in the truth of it all is I'm not trying to depict reality, I'm trying to create a reality. So my job as an illustrator is to make sure my character is convincing. It doesn't have to be photographically spot on, and I don't want it to be. I want it to feel like a painting, but I want it to be convincing. I want it to feel like, yeah, I can see he's holding that sword that has weight. I can see he's straining. I can feel the depth of that chest and that arm area, that hip area, that it's shifting under that weight. You know, I want the metal to feel like it's got a bit of texture and a bit of material that's different to the skin. It'll be treated differently, you know. I remember Mark Chiarello having a chat to him. He was at the time the creative officer at DC Comics, and he was saying, you know, when you're doing Superman bending steel, you want the steel to feel different to his cape, and the cape to feel different to his costume. You know, everything must be treated with the honor of the material that it is, and that's how you create a convincing. And he's spot on. He was absolutely right. It's how you create a convincing image, is by treating and honoring each of those areas as a separate thing. Even though you're trying to unify the picture, you want to make sure that those areas are as convincing as the next. Then you start to see your art change a little bit. As hard as drapery is, there's nothing more satisfying when you get it right. And that's, you know, and there's nothing wrong with going out and throwing, you know, a bed sheet across the grass or in the air and just seeing how air moves around that and how light changes as it hits the different areas of it. That's where the power of that reference becomes important, you know. Let's get into that back and joining here, because he's kind of turning half away from us. And my brain at the moment, as I'm yakking constantly, I'm looking at, does that drop into shadow? I'm asking these questions. Am I highlighting in that area? What's going to be exposed? What's going to be light? What do I need to come back and make a bit more brown in there? Am I adding too much? You know, am I making it muddy? So all of these questions, and of course, at the same time, I'm also looking up, going, "Oh, I've got to darken that area up. That's too light," or you know what, that's not dark enough, or that's not blended. So these questions are always running through your brain. For me, anyway. I mean, if you find art very relaxing and you can disconnect and just paint freely, I admire that. Unfortunately, my brain doesn't work like that. I'm constantly wired into the problem-solving aspect of the painting. All right, so now I've got those basic tones in now. I'm going to get some of that raw sienna on the brush, a little bit touch of that orange perhaps, and now I'll come through and really sort of brown up some of those areas. I think with this one, we're definitely going to have to go through and probably blue up a little bit of those areas as well. But that will come with a bit of time. As we do that. A little bit of that ivory black on the brush. Move through there. If you are starting out in painting, the best thing you can do is just start by getting your primary colors. You know, a lot of people, I know for me, like when I start, I was like, where do I begin? Like there's so many colors, I don't know what to choose. Nobody tells you these things. But just start with your primaries. Like start with your red, blues, and yellows, and then sort of determine too if they are cool or warm in terms of their temperature. So choose those colors that are in one temperature sort of field. So you're working, you know, all in a cool blue or a warm blue sort of spectrum, and then that way you're not crossing the streams too much. You're not sort of, oh look, you know, I'm getting this funky green or a muddy green as I mix my blue and yellows. You'll tend to get a true green according to that temperature if you're using it in that field. So it's always fun to experiment later, giving limes and olive greens and stuff when you start playing around with those colors that are complementary to each other. But just start with your primaries, you know, and then introduce things like your raw siennas, your burnt siennas, your Prussian blues, all these other ones later on. But just start with your primaries to begin with and just play simply. I remember the first piece I did was I drew a Captain America, and I just posted the other day actually. I drew a Captain America and I just wanted to have a play getting the skin tones right and not be too overwhelmed by an entire face. So he's an easy one in the sense that half his face is covered by mask. So I could have a play with that nice cool blue. I think I used a cobalt blue, I think maybe for that. A nice cool blue, and then and just played by mixing those skin tones together. And I didn't use a raw sienna for him. I actually mixed a warm yellow and a warm red and got an orange and added a warm blue, which made it a brown, and then added white to it till I got to the right skin tone. All right, I'm going to let a lot of this dry down a bit because it does need a little bit more work over the top. So I don't want to overwork it while it's a bit wet because it tends to buckle up over. So I'll come back to that and we'll work on those arms now. All right, we are now at the 1 hour mark. Geez, it goes quick, doesn't it? So we're going to try as hard as we can to get as much as we can of HeMan done today in the next hour or less. And then I will finish this off at some stage during the week and post it up as a final image. And then we'll be moving on to King of the Seas in the Motu universe, Merman. Just getting that little hand in there then. I got to admit, this one area I did reference was the hand. I took a photo of my own hand and threw it in there. You know, I could probably have sat there and wrestled around with it for a while, but I thought, oh, it's just, in terms of economy of time, I just sort of take the photo and then draw it from my phone onto my picture. All right, under this bicep here, because it's going to be, the light's obviously going to be giving it shadow from the shield. I'm kind of working in that reflected light tones that I mixed before. So had a bit of that Prussian blue, a little bit of black, and that raw sienna to get me that sort of reflected light brown as I move down. And the mechanics of the shield, I kept it like the toy. So it's just little clip-ons. But the trick was trying to give it a bit of to give it a kind of a steel effect so that it looks, as a convincing piece of reality. But I still wanted the mechanics of the toy to still speak through. And it's the same when I was doing Beastman. I did his little whip with the little handle piece so it goes around his hand. That's a bit fun, but it was just really to honor the original action figure and how it all fit together. And I guess a bit of a challenge too, to go, how can I make this plastic action figure feel like it's living in a real universe? That's always a bit of fun to try, and really hard to push that. Whether you achieve that or not, there's another thing up for question, but it's always nice to have a play in that world. All right. So welcome. If you've just chimed in and joined me, please say hello in the chats. Feel free to ask questions as we're going, and definitely draw along with me as we go. All right, just want a little bit more bluey shadow in here, I think. Just to cool that area down. So just add a little bit of blue, do a little bit of white there. Let's give ourselves a little bit of softer, cooler undertones. All right. Lots of browns happening on here at the moment. lots of warm colors. All right, now we're going to get a little bit of that blue because I do want that left side here to sort of drop in a shadow a little bit. So I'm just going to run a little bit of that Prussian blue and a bit of white down the edge. And of course, some of our characters in this universe are going to be a lot paler and a lot darker, so it just depends on the character. Like, obviously with Merman, we're going to use a lot of cool greens and yellows, cool yellows and greens. So if you are going to be painting and drawing along with us, I'll probably be using a very much a cool yellow, or like a lemon yellow for his armor, and perhaps even like a viridian green for his skin. Maybe even a bit of a turquoise that we can mix in with the green as well. But viridian is what I tend to use for his darker shades. It gives me that real sort of sea greeny sort of color, and it has a bit of iridescence to it, which is nice. But the lemon yellow works. So we're probably using more of the cool register next time as we do our Merman character, which will probably be very similar to Whiplash when we get to him. He has a lot of greens and yellows on him as well. Evil Lyn will probably have a lot of cool blues. Skeletor will be the same. He'll have very cool blues and violets. Whereas HeMan's that very warm sort of sunburnty colours, very dusty brown feeling. All right. So while I'm painting this in, I just want to have a little bit of a talk to you about some of the other works that I'm working on at the moment, so you can sort of join in and keep up. If you want to purchase some of those works, you feel free to do so as well. They are going to go to a print format available at conventions and on Etsy. But some of the other works I'm working on is the Gods and Monsters series, which is going across all pop culture properties. So looking at Marvel, DC, Image, even some of the pulp comics, looking at Dynamite, IDW, and Saturday morning cartoons and books and other properties. So, and I'm just doing miniature portraits of those characters. And I'm up to series 2 at the moment. So I'm just doing a Doctor Doom at the moment. And I did a Barry Allen Flash last. But then I've done a Shadow, so, and a Phantom. So it just depends on, oops, let me just cut around there. Just depends on the list that I've sort of written this crazy list that goes for like 12 series. And I'll probably be dead by the time we get to that, or a lot grayer than I am now, but at least I've got a projected intention. I know sort of where I'm going to go with it. We're going to get to maybe 4 of the series, and then we're going to go to print into an A4 or A5 hardcover, which will be available to buy. So that's one series I'm working on. I'm obviously working on the Motu 52, which is what we're doing now. And I've got a series starting called Incarnations, where we're going through portraits in history. Some are known, like obviously Romans and Egyptians and Sumerians. Some are least known. So that's going to be an interesting and fun way to do things as well. And also working on a graphic novel, which I will talk about a little bit closer to when we've got a bit of something to show as well. But that's pretty exciting. All right, I'm just darkening under that underarm here. I might change that a little bit at some stage. I do want to put some sort of strainy veins happening off his arm there at some point. And I do want to run a slab or two of just highlight bright sort of skin tone there, where the light is hitting that arm as it's emerging from the side of his body. So what I'm doing now is just putting a little bit of undertone, bit of mid-tone action, which I'll then obviously highlight with a vein, some of those veins sticking out of his forearm, as well as a bright sort of highlighted area as his arm's coming out from the corner there. Good thing about working in this warmth, I suppose, is that everything's drying super quickly, which is helpful. Now you can see on that left side now how that blue has dried into the skin tone and created a cooler shadowed version. Oops, sorry, just jumped out of focus a bit, compared to up here where it's got that terminated line of dark brown. So it's just allowed us a bit of variation in our depth. It creates a nice break for our eye, because often we look around the picture and go, oh, there's a lot of that, a lot of that, a lot of that. This just allows us a bit of space to cool down a bit. And do I need lots of detail in those spaces? No. I love some of those artists that did this, like Wally Woods and Toth, that did those really early sort of Thunder Agents, and then Toth was obviously did all the Space Ghost and Birdman work. And I remember Toth saying in a quote that he'd spent most of his early career learning how to put detail in, and then spent the last part of his career learning how to take things out and minimizing, so that the human eye could and the imagination could fill in the gaps. And that's it tends to resonate with me more now that I'm older as an illustrator than ever before, because I work to try and do that. I try to, how can I reduce the amount of detail and lines so that the human eye fills in the gaps just by a few strokes. And, it makes you look at things like the work of Frank Frazetta differently, and some of the classical artists where they'll just slab a color here or a highlight here or a shadow here, and it works. Steve, that's what I was saying. Steve Rude's work, again, his, I can see he's doing that stuff now. He's at that point of evolving as an illustrator where he's minimizing his detail but putting in highlights and shadows that make the eye move and fill in the gaps themselves. The hands are going to require a little bit more extra work because I do want to get that sort of leathery, grabbing sort of fist feeling as he's holding that sword. But it'll require a bit of drying, and then I'll come in and delicately put in those dark areas with a finer brush. Right now, I'm just kind of getting it in there and making some decisions for later. All right. All right, so we're going to get this other hand done now. Move that up a bit. This is where that tracing paper plays in nicely. Like I said, I'll come through and I'll put in all the highlights and details for the fingernails. That's really just trying to get those base tones in there for this area. Because the fingers deserve a little bit extra attention, just like the face. I'll come through and do a final pass over the face, getting the nostrils in and the eye color, all of those things. So now this is going to, I might put a bit of highlight on that thumb, but the rest we're going to drop into reflected light, just like we did with the bicep, because that will be underneath the shield there, as we know. Mixing a bit of that Prussian blue again with my raw sienna. Is this as dark as it needs to be? Probably not, but it will at least give me a grounding and a starting point to make a decision around that with that color in place, right? So if I'd gone straight black with that, it's made the decision for me. There's not a lot of reverse I can do with it. But with this mid-tone, this mid-reflected light, I can sort of decide, yeah, it needs to be a bit lighter or it needs to be a bit darker. I've still got room for choices. Bring it around here like that. Like so. All right, I just blew that down a little bit more. around those little clips. And then just add a little bit of that white just on the most reflected area, and that will react with the blue, of course, and create like a misty skin color. It's exactly what I want, so that when I go through and put my veins and reaffirm some of those browns and reds, that it'll react with that nicely. It makes a nice underpainting area. There we go. Now you can start to see already that I've determined where my highlights are, where my midtones and reflected lights are, and you can see now why those areas are important. You know, you've got to have those cool areas because it makes those brighter areas really pop out. And I can't rely on a background too much because this is a very minimal background. It's going to have obviously some of the cracked earth and a bit of the lava coming out. So some of that will create steam and reflected light along my character here a little bit, just on the inside of his leg from the lava. But and the hole and that mist will sort of snake its way up. Might have it come up around here a little bit under the arm, perhaps the mist up area. Maybe a little bit of Eternian mountains in the background. So like almost like a bit of Monument Valley action happening over there. But Monument Valley meets Roadrunner, sort of kind of mountains in the background. And then really that's it for the background. I'm not going to do too much more than that because it's really about the main illustration of HeMan, just like when we did Beastman, keeping the background reasonably clean. All right, so we're going to start on those legs now as we move down. We'll probably wrap up in about 10 minutes. We're at the hour-and-a-half mark. And then I'll do a bit off camera and then maybe do the final pass as we come through for the final stream on it of HeMan. You can see these works take a little bit of time to evolve, and you've got to give them that time. They deserve it. You rush it through, like I said, you don't want it to look like a rushed piece. You want it to look like it has the care, and if you're buying art, you want to make sure that you're getting the care and the time spent with something. You know, I see a lot of art looks like it's been sort of rushed and banged out for sale. You want to make sure that you're getting art that resonates a level of knowledge and care. And hopefully as artists, that's our primary focus, is to channel a bit of that knowledge and feeling, and it's about the art, not about the factory line of sales, which is a hard balance, I know, but you want to make sure that at least it's about the journey. Welcome if you're joining me here today on the live stream. We are obviously painting HeMan. This is our second stream on this because the first one was trying to get the pose finished and finalized and the light source worked out. Now we're just painting our first layers in onto the HeMan character so we can determine where our main color layers are falling, how to build in those reflected lights and main shadows, and also sort of making a lot of the decisions around where the colors are falling, because some of these things are, once they're down, they're down. So that decision process while I'm having a chat is also running through the back of my head. And then it also informs me for my next step, once this is dried for a few days, to then come in and do my final pass of highlights and shadows maybe redefine some of those areas a little bit. That is the process. Then I'll scan it and throw it up online and move on to HeMan. It'll be up for sale, of course, at our Etsy shop. You just have to look up Art of Will Playden, or you can access the link on the Facebook and Instagrams if you wish. All right, so I'm just going to move that sepia out a little bit to the middle of the thigh here. Middle of that leg muscle. I don't want to look like balloons either, so even though he's tensing, so it's the tone has got to be subtle. So it doesn't look like I've got these giant sort of inflated water balloon legs. So it's going to take a little bit more work than what I put on there at the moment to try and achieve that. Try and reduce those shapes a little bit. Even though if you look at any bodybuilder, they tend to look pretty sharp and defined. I want to make sure that it translates well to a painting. All right. This area, I've always found this area a bit of a mystery to me, this knee area, especially with overly muscly figures. Just learning the tricky sort of muscles and areas where the knee sort of connects as that joint to the calves. I always find that area a bit of a funny area to paint and draw. I tend to have to spend a bit of time down here making it convincing rather than rush through it. Yeah, it's one where you want to feel like there's a lot of tense and weight and tension and in the joints there, but you also don't want it to look like it's got an action figure joint either. You want it to feel like it's all conjoined into one area, that the calves and the legs are one thing. All right. Okay. All right, might just do this last leg and then we'll probably wrap it up for today while we let it dry. And then we'll come through and we'll start the accessories, the hair, and the final pass, and obviously do a little bit during the week as well. While I'm just having a quick breather, I just want to talk about where you can find me. So you can find me as the Art of Will Playden on YouTube, Instagram, Facebook, and of course, all art available is at Etsy. And you can reach out and message me on those sites. And YouTube's a bit more tricky, but if you reach out to me on Instagram and Facebook as a DM, I always answer those messages, and you can talk to me a little bit about your process, or even if it's about questions about commissions or art. I am working on only one commission at the moment, but I am trying to get some of these projects sort of launched as well. So my timeline is a little bit tight, But talk to me and we can negotiate around that. Let's look at our HeMan list. So as you can see, we've got Beastman there completed. HeMan's next, or HeMan's working on now, obviously in process. We have Merman, then we have Man at Arms. That's going to be a great one to do. Skeletor. I can see another 15,000 drawings to get Skeletor right. Stratos, he was always my favorite as a kid. Then we go with Tila. We're going to keep going. It just keeps going on. Zodak, Shira. It's kind of, the list is built through the actual waves of the figures and when they came out. So we're going to try and work through it. Now, it's not a 52-week thing. It's not week by week by week by week by week. It's really about just doing it when you can do it and uploading when you can do it. Yes, we're doing visual prompts on the Artists of the Universe Facebook site, saying, look, this is the resource, this is what we're using, let's start this together, and it's as an encouragement, but there's certainly no pressure to do this as we're doing it. You do it as you'd like. And there's the Merman, the Beastman man once again on a bit of a card back there. But you can see where we've got the mechanics. I've got the mechanics little whip there on the handpiece, the straps for the armor for the toy. So kept true to the original design, even though I went a little bit embellished with his little loinclothy bit down the bottom there, but kept true to the actual original toy and illustration as much as I could. And then giving a nice sort of Frazetta, Tarzan, almost Conan, fire and ice kind of vine happening there on the edge. So lots of fun. Okay, so let's get this last leg knocked on the head. If you're joining me now, please jump on and say good day, say hello, so I can see if you're joining me, and I'll see he's in the room. We don't know that when we're streaming. And if you're watching later on, please like and subscribe onto our channels, and it always helps out if you can help put the word out and share these things around for us. Look at me, I'm just jumping back to that safety spot at that last leg again. Noodling away some of these areas. I don't want to do too much because it is still in that process of drying. I don't want to muck around with it too much. Okay, this next leg, I'm just going to move my palette over a little bit so I don't move the drawing. That is the tricky thing about doing these live streams, that you can't move your picture around everywhere, otherwise you lose it off the camera. All right, so I'm going to start, whenever I start on a new area, I start where it's reasonably safe in my shadow areas, because I can always go lighter, go darker. But if you go smack bang in a light area, it can sometimes be a problem. I'll move up to that thigh muscle. We're working in over my pencil work. Now, of course, it's going to require a little bit more thickness of gouache to hide some of that pencil work. Absolutely. And hopefully by the end of it, it has the same thick application and level of value and chroma that the Beastman one does, where it's kind of bright and popping off the page. And you feel like, you're convinced by some of those muscle tones and textures of the armor and weapons. We're going to try and get that strand. That leg is really pushed out. So you want to feel like the muscles are really pushing hard on that leg there. We want to make sure that we honor that a bit. A bit of a shout out to some of the artists that are working really hard at the moment. Friends of mine that are doing some beautiful work. Obviously, I mentioned Kenny before, Kenny Calderone at Wild Inks. He's doing his Premier Marvel cards at the moment. They're looking fantastic. Working on such a small area and getting some very cool results. You can find him on all platforms. So again, just like I am, and you can find him through any of the past live streams that we've done together. And he's also on the Artist of the Universe group, but he's doing some great stuff. And his commissions always look bang on, especially his ink work looks fantastic. So Kenny Calderone, man to watch. Definitely collect his art. Reach out to him. The Powers family, so Rob and Maura, do some incredible stuff. Rob's doing some amazing work. I love his Ninja Turtle piece that he completed a little while back. And he's obviously got his Kickstarters that are out at the moment. And just amazing me constantly that there are new characters that he's bringing forward. And, you know, whether it's the Penguino's Revenge stuff or whether he's working on the new female character, I can't think of the name now, but the new female character he's doing. Some cool stuff. Like Rob Powers is all over it. Super dynamic colors. Love what he's doing. So he's great. Aunt Vu, she's doing some incredible work with reappropriating Funko Pop boxes, and so jump on and support her for sure. She does a lot of in the day live streams. I say in the day because it's in the day for me, but it might be nighttime for other parts of the world. But she does some incredible work as well. A lot of Australian artists that are working on their works as well, and pushing hard and getting stuff done, which is great to see. And yeah, get on there and support them. Like, go through, like their stuff. Jim O'Reilly, I see him constantly sculpting and doing some cool stuff. His Beastman was fantastic. But he's always doing incredible work. I saw him doing a throne the other day. I thought, wow, that would look amazing as a shelf piece for some sort of figure. Very Conan-esque looking. It always amazes me that some of these big companies haven't grabbed these cats and just said, look, let's get it on there. Because sometimes I see the work in some of these big companies, I think, oh, that's cool, but some of these independent guys are really running rings. All right, there's that right leg in. Okay, so let's see what we got. We're at 12:06 now. So we might wrap it up there for this session. I'm just going to let that skin tone settle and dry. Like I said, I tend to build my layers slowly so that my paper doesn't go like ruffleage. And then we will come through and we'll put in all the details, the bare skin, the boots, you know, all the fun stuff that you're not too scared and worried about muscle tone. I'll do a final pass, I think, between now and the next live stream, so that you can see the final skin effects. And then we'll spend the next live stream doing just maybe the background and HeMan's accessories. So if you've joined me today, thank you for joining me on this second live stream. Remembering that you can reach out to me on these platforms. Like and subscribe on YouTube. It always helps. And definitely follow along on Instagram and Facebook. And you'll see little updates as we go. Even if it's not HeMan, you'll see other stuff that I'm doing. And of course, all art is available at the Etsy shop. So thanks again for joining me on today's Master of the Universe art stream. And I will see you next time.